This is Pastor Jeff Kelley, inviting you to join me for Gleanings of Grace, a ministry of Grace Baptist Church in Liberty, South Carolina. Situated in the foothills of the upstate of South Carolina, Grace Baptist Church is centrally located between Greenville and Clemson. If you live within driving distance, or if you should be visiting our area, we extend a personal invitation for you to worship with us. You will find a warm and friendly congregation where visitors are welcome. You can learn more about our church or contact us at gracebaptistchurchsc.org.
John is known as the apostle of love. We've been spending several weeks in the Gospel of John. John is well known for having given to us that verse in John chapter 3 and verse 16. For God so loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish but have everlasting life. John's gospel is about the love of God. And his epistle here, and specifically here in chapter 4, he's writing of the love of God. And this week, as we turn our attention toward this well-known holiday that is coming up, or this well-known event that is commemorated as Valentine's Day, there is a lot of discussion, a lot of talk, a lot of action, a lot of expressing, if you will, of love. To me, in my opinion, love is quite frankly a funny thing. It reminds me of the saying that is said sometimes which I think encapsulates what I mean when I think of love as being a funny thing. Someone said, to live above with the saints we love, that will be glory. But to dwell below with the saints we know, well, that's another story. And that is exactly what it seems that love really is. We could talk in all of these grandiose terms and maybe even poetic expressions of our love and how we love people. But in reality, it seems we have the most difficult time in the world living with those that we claim to love. We express the deepest and the greatest of love. But at the same time, we have the most difficult and the most trying time living out that love. I'm reminded of what Brother Johnny Pope preached some years ago. I heard a message that he preached, and quite frankly, I can relate to this in many respects. Johnny Pope said that we will say of our spouse, we say of our wife, well, I would run out in front of a garbage truck to save her life. I would dash out in front of a truck to pull her to safety or to somehow save her life. I would risk my life to do that. But he observes that we won't carry out the trash to demonstrate our love. We have a little joke inside. In fact, we came home last night and Kim said, I got to do something with this trash. And I tease her all the time that she lives just to fill trash bags so that I'll have to carry them to the road. And I said, I don't want to move those trash bags. Let's just leave them right there, because if I move them, you will feel compelled to fill up another one. And I'll have to move it. If I just leave it here, you'll maybe not want to fill another one up. We joke about it, we laugh about it, but it's true. We will climb the highest mountain, we proclaim, to yell of our love off into the valley below so that it will echo back in our ears. But will we cross the street to really demonstrate our love? Love is a funny thing. I was pondering this thought and was reminded that love is often the source of our deepest pain, our fiercest anger, our most intense resentment, and the list could probably go on and on and on. All of these things out of love, maybe sometimes right and maybe sometimes wrong. It would seem sometimes that that two people can't argue more than two people who claim to love the most. Passers-by on the street will argue and move on about their way, but two people who claim to love each other the most seem sometimes to get the most enjoyment out of arguing with one another. It just seems that love is central to all the emotions that we feel. And yet, all of us, the world, pursues love. We live, it would seem, to love and to be loved. There seems to be no greater depth, if you will, of emotion or despondency than the feeling that no one loves me. And to feel that no one really cares, no one is interested in me. There seems to be no more motivating emotion than the love that one will have toward another. Love will make you do crazy things. Love will make you spend money you don't have. Love will make you pursue someone in all of the strangest ways because maybe rightfully or wrongfully you perceive that you love that person. You have a great attraction or love for that person. And John tells us a bit about this pursuit of love. I was pondering the service today and the message, and the little phrase that is found in verse number 10 of 1 John 4 caught my attention. Herein is love. If I ask us this morning, what does love look like? How would we answer? We might be inclined to say, well, I'll tell you what love looks like. There's this couple I know, and we might describe all of these things. If that isn't love, I don't know what love is. We might define love by defining what we think it is not. Well, I'll tell you one thing. Whatever love is, it is not this. This is not real love. We might define love by these types of things. But John, who knew the Lord, John, the disciple that was beloved of the Lord, the disciple who is known as the apostle of love, in his epistle, in his letter, says to us, herein is love. This, if I may paraphrase, this is love. Well, if John is telling us what love looks like, what love is, don't you think we ought to pay a little attention to it? Herein is love. Not that we loved God, but that He loved us and sent His Son to be the propitiation for our sins. Beloved, if God so loved us, we ought also to love one another. I want to spend the time that we have remaining this morning dealing with this thought: in pursuit of love. We live to love. We live to be loved. But could it be that we are pursuing love from the wrong sources, from the wrong places? We are looking in all the wrong places to find true love, in pursuit of love. When I read what John speaks of with regard to love in this passage, I can't help but see what I would refer to as the marvel of love. When we think of love, we might not want to really face the fact, but oftentimes we are motivated. Love is motivated or is seen in that which brings us satisfaction. We tend to love things that make us happy. We tend to love people who affirm us or do something for us. We speak of love in a lot of strange ways. We love food that we think tastes good. I mean, I don't think it's any surprise to anybody here. I don't love broccoli. I like to think I don't hate broccoli, but I don't love broccoli. And the reason I don't love broccoli, and some of you listening to me love broccoli, is because I don't like what broccoli tastes like. It doesn't do anything for me. Now, I love chocolate because it tastes good. You know, I like those little fudge rounds. They taste good. You may say, I can take it or leave it. Now, in a very real sense, that you would say, Jeff, that is so simplistic. That is so trite. But it is so true. Because why do you love some people and why do you not love some people? Because even when we do not want to admit it, we love some people because they affirm us. We like what they tell us. I just love that person. Why? Because it's always, it's hard not to love a grandmother or a grandfather. Why? Because they let the grandkids get away with everything. Grandkids love their grandparents when they don't love their parents. I'm being somewhat facetious, but that is really why. Because the grandparents have never seen some type of candy that the kids didn't need, some type of toy that they weren't willing to spend their children's inheritance to acquire that toy. So the grandkids love the grandparents. I'm being facetious to a measure, but the point is true. We love people. We love those who do something for us. But here's the marvel of God's love. We could do nothing for God. In fact, not only could we not just do anything for God, we had greatly offended God. We had greatly harmed God, if you will. What is the marvel of His love? Not that we loved God. That's not what is amazing. We do not sing of the greatness of our love for God. Our love for God is manifested in songs like When I Survey the Wondrous Cross on which the Prince of Glory died. My richest gain I count but loss. Why? Because we look at the love of God and we respond to the love of God. How can I not love Him? Because of what He has done for me. Not that we love God, but that He loved us. It may seem for those of us who love God, who are part of the family of God, who by faith in Jesus Christ are saved, it may be easy sometimes, if we're not careful, to forget. But the world needs to be reminded of the marvel of God's love. He loves us. And Paul writes in similar fashion about this in Romans chapter 5. Romans chapter 5, he speaks of our justification before God. And he says in verse number 8, but God commendeth His love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. He's really saying the same thing that John is saying in 1 John 4. God loved us and He showed us His love in giving His Son to die for us. But do you notice the language that Paul uses in Romans chapter 5? He says that while we were yet sinners, that's the marvel of God's love. Paul uses this illustration. He says in verse number 7, for scarcely for a righteous man will one die. Somebody might die for a righteous man, a person who is upright, law-abiding citizen. Scarcely. On occasion, they will do that. That's why it's so significant when we read and hear of soldiers on the battlefield who throw themselves into harm's way to defend their friends and fellow soldiers in arms. They put them scarcely. That is an unusual thing. We aren't stepping out in front of traffic to save our friends, to help our loved ones. Scarcely will that happen. Peradventure, on occasion, somebody will die for a good man. But can I say to you that this love of Christ is illustrated in the fact that people will protest a capital punishment event, but they will not line up to say, let me die in their place. They may say they're criminals, but they will say they should not die. They may say, we think they are guilty, they should serve a life sentence, but they should not be put to death. But I don't know that I've ever heard of anyone saying, let me die in their place. Maybe on one occasion I heard the story of such an event. We do not do that, but God did. God loved us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. But you know what strikes me even more in what Paul is saying in Romans chapter 5 is that because we are sinners, we are also enemies. I don't know if this helps us to understand this, but in a sense, being a sinner is our standing before God. We were born in sin. We are sinners. That's who we are. But as enemies of God, it seems to indicate the outworkings of our standing, the outworkings of who we are. Paul said, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Down in verse 10, for if when we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of His Son. Paul says we were enemies of God. You go over to chapter 8 of the book of Romans and you find out about what that kind of looks like. Paul is writing of the carnal mind and of the spiritual mind, of the flesh and of the spirit. And if I understand the context in which he is writing, he's not writing here of a carnal Christian and a spirit-filled or spirit-led Christian. As he spoke of in 1 Corinthians chapter 2 and 3 of the natural man, the carnal man, and the spiritual man. He's not speaking of the same classifications. Here he's saying the carnal, the fleshly man, the unsaved man, and the spiritual man, the saved man. And he says in verse number 7, the carnal mind is enmity against God. And he speaks of it as being against Him. Romans chapter 1 shows us the expression, what it looks like for us to be at enmity with God. We are the enemies of God, and the outworkings of our life by our nature are acts of violence, acts of insubordination, acts of rebellion against God. Let's just reduce it to this simple thought. Even to strike or to strike at or to murder, to take the life of someone is basically striking at God. Because that individual is born and made in the image of God. And so to strike at, to bring harm to that person it's the image of God. One person I heard give the illustration was saying if I had a picture, and he used a picture of his spouse. I'll use the same picture. If I had a picture of my spouse here this morning, if I had a picture of Kim, and you looked at that picture and you took it out of its frame and you ripped it up, you haven't physically harmed my wife, but you have expressed to me how you feel about her, and in a sense you have struck at her. It's an image of her. To strike at man is to strike at God. We are enemies of God, and the outworkings of our life by our sinful nature demonstrate that we are enemies. That's the marvel of God's love. We didn't love God. We weren't pursuing God. What was the poet wrote about the hound of heaven who chased him up the stairs and down the stairs, through the corridors of life, through the pathways of life, all throughout all the different places that his life took him until the hound of heaven chased him down. He wasn't searching God. God was searching for him. I see the marvel of God's love in this text. I see the manifestation of God's love in this text. Not that we loved God, but that He loved us. Notice the phrase, and He sent His Son. He sent His Son. You know, a lot of people this week will demonstrate their love. There will be a lot of chocolate bought and given away. Flowers, the florists love this season. Roses, There'll be all kinds of little corny little poems. Roses are red, violets are blue, yada, yada, yada. All these little cards will be given. Some people will buy big, extravagant gifts trying to say, I love you. I love you. But the greatness of God's love is manifested in the nature of this gift. It was His Son. The sinless Son of God. You ever pondered John 3:16? We can quote it. We can rattle it off. But have you ever stopped to think about it? For God so loved Think about someone you know. They love this person. What have they done for that person? For God so loved. How could God show His love for humanity? He gave His only begotten Son. So I would say to you that the manifestation of this love is seen in the fact that God has given us, it's in the nature of the gift, to give His Son. The greatness of God's love is seen not only in the nature of this gift, but in the purpose of this gift. He sent His Son that He should be the propitiation for our sins. The word propitiation is just if I can say it respectfully, just a fancy word that means the satisfaction, the appeasement. Not in a trivial sense, but the fact that it satisfied God, it appeased God. The wrath of God was satisfied. I have said it often, and I believe it strongly. The greatness and the magnitude of God's hatred for sin is manifested in the cruel cross of Calvary, the death of Christ. But that greatness of God's wrath against sin is matched only by the love of Christ, love of God, in giving His Son to endure that punishment, to pay that penalty of sin, and His mercy that is extended in so doing it. The greatness of His wrath is matched by the greatness of His love and His mercy. God loved the world that He gave His only begotten Son. And He gave His Son to satisfy Himself for us. I love my children dearly. A daughter-in-law, now our granddaughter. But if it took the life of one of them, or in particular one of my sons, to satisfy a right sense of justice that someone had incurred against me, in my flesh, that's the last thought in the world that would be in my mind. Would be the giving of one of my own children, one of my own family members, to satisfy some wrong someone had done for me. But not God. He gave His Son. And it was necessary that it be His Son because no one else could pay this price. If your son or daughter was the only one that could satisfy, resolve some conflict, would you be willing to give them? I dare say we would not. But God did. And He manifested His love. Paul says He demonstrated His love. While we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Which leads me not just to the marvel of God's love, not that we love God, but that He loved us. The manifestation of His love, that He sent His Son to be the propitiation for our sins. But I want to draw our attention for just a few moments this morning to the meaning of love. It is a wonderful thing that God sent His Son and that we can have salvation through Christ. That is wonderful. But as seems to be always the case with God, He doesn't just do things without a purpose. And John says, beloved, if God so loved us, we ought also to love one another. Between verse 10 and verse 11, it goes back to that little poem I opened up with this morning. To live above with saints, we know that will be glory. That's verse 10. Oh, it's wonderful. God has saved us. To dwell below with the saints we know, well, that's another story. No, God says it's not another story. I have saved you. I loved you that you would love one another. The pattern of our love is found in what God has done for us. If God loved, we ought. It's amazing how little phrases come together, isn't it, in the Bible? If God, we ought. There's no question God loved us. Well, we ought to love one another. It's our pattern. The love of God is the love we ought to demonstrate to one another. And I don't know about you, but that is quite convicting at times. God loved with a pure love. He could be stern in His love, and yet He loved deeply. He could be extremely compassionate in His love, loving with a pure love. The perfection of our love is spoken of in verse number 12. No man hath seen God at any time. If we love one another, God dwelleth in us, and His love is perfected in us. God wants to perfect that love, to develop that love. And ultimately that love is a love that is seen in verse number 17, that is mature and perfect, that we can stand before God with a clear conscience on the day of judgment, knowing that we are His. Which leads me not just to the perfection of our love, but the proof of our love. John ends this chapter by saying, if there's anybody who says, I love God, and he hates his brother, boy, John would not be popular in a lot of churches today, would he? He is a liar. Well, John, you mean he just misspoke? No, John says he's a liar. For he that loveth not his brother whom he hath seen, how can he love God whom he hath not seen? Here is my point. The proof of our love is found in the demonstration of our love one to another. If God has loved us, we ought to love one another. As Peter says, love one another with a pure heart, fervently. I'm not saying that's always easy, but I am saying that's what God has said we should do. You know, I don't know all the circumstances and all the information, but just recently this came to be a great matter of debate and discussion. In fact, the article that I researched this morning to just verify my facts speaks of this act sparking a debate. Because it's not normal to forgive people who have done us wrong. And when Brant Jean forgave his brother's killer, even asking the judge, can I step off of the witness stand and give her a hug? It shocked the world. His brother had been killed by this now former Dallas police officer in a very tragic series of circumstances. And after her sentencing, the brother of this victim expressed to this individual that his main desire wasn't for her to go to jail, but that it was for her to give your life to Christ, in his words. And the world was shocked, and they debated it. But this is exactly what Jesus was speaking of. The ability that is beyond the ability of mere mortal man to look at someone who has done us greatly wrong and say, I love you with the love of Christ because God loved me, and what I want for you is to know that same love. If God loved us, we ought to love one another.
You've been listening to Gleanings of Grace, a ministry of Grace Baptist Church in Liberty, South Carolina. We invite you to correspond with us by writing to Grace Baptist Church, Post Office Box 1454, Easley, South Carolina 29641. You may also contact us or learn more about the church by visiting gracebaptistchurchsc.org.